$38 trillion. That is what the United States owes today, not in the distant future, right now. And the number is still climbing. One president erased the national debt to zero. Another multiplied it 40 times in 4 years. The rest left their names on a ledger that has never stopped growing. The answers to who added the most and what the country got for it are in the numbers. And they are not what most people expect. When the first Congress met in 1789, the country was already in the red. The Revolutionary War had left a bill of roughly $75 million. Foreign loans, soldiers' pay, promises the old Confederation could not keep. The Constitution had just made that debt the new federal government's problem. The first Treasury Secretary, Alexander Hamilton, submitted his report on the public credit in January 1790. He did not try to pay it off quickly. He argued the government should assume it, fund it, and pay it down slowly. Congress fought over the plan for months. Hamilton wanted the federal government to assume the states' war debts too, to fold everything into one national obligation. The deal was done by August 1790. The Funding Act became law. The debt was here to stay. That choice, to treat debt as a tool rather than a sin, would shape every presidency that followed. The United States has carried debt every year since, with one exception. For decades, the number crept up and sometimes down. Roads were built, territories bought, wars were small and short. The Treasury kept the books. No one imagined that one day a single president would push the number to zero. Then came a man who believed debt was not a tool. He believed it was a moral failing. Andrew Jackson had been ruined once by debt and never forgot it. He despised the National Bank and saw debt as a moral failing. When he entered the White House, the debt stood near $58 million. He vetoed roads and canals. He fought the National Bank and sold huge amounts of federal land in the West. By January 1, 1835, the Treasury owed nothing, zero. It is the only time in American history the national debt has ever hit zero. The triumph did not last. The land boom collapsed. Without the National Bank to steady credit, speculation had run wild. The Panic of 1837 shattered the economy. Banks failed. Unemployment soared. The government had to borrow again, and it has never stopped. No president has ever paid it to zero again. At the time, no one could have known that the next crisis would multiply the debt not by 2 or 3, but by 40. What came next would make that borrowing look like pocket change. In 1860, on the eve of the Civil War, the debt was about $65 million. Lincoln's Treasury Secretary, Salmon Chase, created the first federal currency in 1862 and a national banking system the following year. The Union issued hundreds of millions in war bonds. Congress passed the first federal income tax, 3% on income above $800. The Union financed roughly 2/3 of the war by borrowing. The rest came from taxes and the printing of money. By 1863, the debt had already passed $1 billion. 4 years later, Abraham Lincoln called it a national debt and taxation unprecedented in the country. By the time the war ended, the figure had passed $2 billion. The debt had grown by a factor of roughly 40, still the largest multiple increase in American history. Debt was no longer a temporary emergency. It was how the Union had bought its survival. The figure would drift for the rest of the century up through Reconstruction, down in good years, but never again so small. World War I under Woodrow Wilson took the debt from under $3 billion when he took office to nearly $24 billion when he left. In 8 years, the figure had grown by more than 7 times. The country had never spent so much so fast. Then something rare happened. Something that would not happen again for 100 years. In the 1920s, under Warren Harding and Calvin Coolidge, the government actually paid down the debt. Treasury Secretary Andrew Mellon pushed to limit spending and use surpluses to retire bonds. Coolidge met weekly with his budget director to enforce discipline. He cut federal spending from over $3 billion to under $3 billion by the end of his term. Surpluses were used to retire bonds. It was the last era when presidents could claim they were shrinking what the nation owed. Only 2 presidents in the modern era have overseen a net reduction in debt. Both were in the 1920s. No one has done it since. The Great Depression and the New Deal ended that. Franklin Roosevelt entered office with the economy in collapse. Banks had failed. Millions were out of work. His programs cost money, jobs, relief, public works. The debt began to climb. By the end of the 1930s, the total was already far above what Wilson had left, but that was only the beginning. Then came the war, and the borrowing that followed would dwarf everything that had come before, and the numbers would never look the same again. World War II did what every major war had done, only bigger. In 1940, the debt stood at $51 billion. The Treasury sold war bonds to the public. Tax revenue rose under the Revenue Act of 1942, but borrowing did most of the work. Deficits as a share of the economy reached levels that have never been matched in peacetime. The government borrowed over $200 billion to fund the fight. By the end of the war, it had passed $260 billion. Roosevelt had overseen the largest percentage increase in the national debt of any president. The debt as a share of the economy peaked under Harry Truman in the years right after the highest it has ever been relative to the size of the economy. In the decades that followed, growth and inflation shrank that ratio. The dollar amount kept rising, but the country was growing faster for a while. The country had borrowed to save the world, and the bill would hang over the rest of the century. In the decades that followed, the debt as a share of the economy actually fell. Growth outpaced borrowing. By 1973, it had hit a post-war low, but that trend would not hold. What happened next would lock in deficits for a generation. From the 1980s onward, the numbers ceased to feel abstract. Ronald Reagan added over $1.6 trillion, cutting taxes and raising defense spending by 35%. He believed government was the problem, not the solution, but the debt grew anyway. The debt crossed $1 trillion, then $2, then $3. Between 1980 and 1990, it more than tripled. George W. Bush added about $4 trillion. The wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, tax cuts, and the start of the Great Recession. Researchers would later put the total cost of the post-September 11th wars in the trillions. The cost of those wars would stretch across 3 presidencies. When he left office, the debt stood near $10.6 trillion. Then the numbers jumped again, and they have not stopped. Barack Obama inherited a crisis. Banks were failing. Unemployment was spiking. The previous administration had left 2 wars and a recession. In his first 115 days in office, the debt rose by more than $645 billion, the largest short-term increase of any president to that point. He would not be the last to hold that kind of record. He signed an $832 billion stimulus and $858 billion in tax cuts. The wars continued. Year after year, the total climbed. By the time he left office, the debt had grown by nearly $7.7 trillion. The next administration would add even more in a single term. If you enjoyed this deep dive into how presidents shape the nation's finances, like the video and subscribe for more weekly history breakdowns. Donald Trump's first term added roughly $7.8 trillion. Tax cuts and spending pushed the total higher. Then came 2020. The pandemic shut down the economy. Within weeks, Congress was drafting the largest rescue package in history. Congress passed the CARES Act, $2.2 trillion, the largest single rescue package in American history. Checks went to families. Money flowed to businesses. The debt ceiling had to be raised again and again. Treasury secretaries warned of default. In January 2023, the government hit the ceiling again. Extraordinary measures kept the lights on until Congress suspended it. Deals were struck. The ceiling was suspended, then raised. The cycle repeated. Joe Biden took office and signed the American Rescue Plan, another $1.9 trillion in relief. Extended unemployment, direct payments, and pandemic programs kept the total rising. Over his 4 years, the debt increased by about $8.4 trillion. In dollar terms, that is the largest increase under any single president. The total had crossed $30 trillion and kept going. As of late 2025, the figure has passed $38 trillion. In raw dollars, no president has added more to the national debt than Biden. In percentage terms, no one surpasses Roosevelt. In multiple of increase, no one touches Lincoln. 3 different records. 3 different eras. 1 running total. Lincoln multiplied a small number until it was enormous. Roosevelt oversaw the biggest percentage jump in history. Biden added the largest dollar amount in a single presidency. Each number is true. Each tells a different story. The ledger has no party. Wars, recessions, tax cuts, and rescues have been signed by both parties. Congress appropriates, presidents sign. Historians and economists still argue over how much any single president controls the number. Inherited wars, inherited recessions, inherited budgets. A president's first year is mostly someone else's spending. The real impact shows up later. But the number keeps moving, $38 trillion, and it is still climbing. And the real question is not only who added the most, but what the nation bought with it: wars, recovery, relief, roads, and rescue, and what it will cost to carry it forward. The number has no memory. It only adds up. Every president has left a line on the ledger. Some added almost nothing. One erased it. Others multiplied it beyond recognition. The story of who added the most is the story of what America chose to pay for and what it is still paying. If this look at the numbers behind the headlines resonated with you, like the video and subscribe for more documentaries that put history in context.